They say betrayal is like a blade. Swift, sharp, cruel. But for me, it was quieter. Like frostbite. It crept in slow, disguised as friendship. And by the time I noticed the pain, the damage was already done. My name is Ilara Quinn. I'm 29 years old. But to tell you the truth, my life ended at 22. Or at least the version of my life I believed in. I used to think hard work was enough. That if you stayed honest, poured your soul into your dreams, people would see you for who you really were. And treat you the same way. I believed in loyalty. I believed in partnership. And most of all, I believed in her. Her name was Harper Blake. My best friend since college. We were opposites in every way that made us whole. I was quiet, analytical, awkward at parties. She was bold, persuasive, magnetic. I'd code until my fingers ached. She'd pitch the vision like poetry to rooms full of skeptical investors. I didn't want the spotlight. She couldn't survive without it. And somehow that balance worked. Together we built PulseNet. It started as an idea scribbled on napkins between night classes and cheap ramen. A data-powered platform to help small businesses run outreach campaigns without hiring expensive consultants. We weren't trying to change the world, just give regular people a fighting chance. Platform worked. We knew it would. I spent months building the backend from scratch. Clean architecture, tight security, smart automations. Harper found our first investor with a handshake and a smile that could convince a drowning man to buy water. 21, we signed our first contract. 22, we quit our jobs. By 23, PulseNet was growing faster than we could handle. And that's when things started changing. Harper became different. She started showing up to meetings in clothes she couldn't afford 6 months ago. She networked at elite tech events without me saying, "They only allow 1+1. She started rewriting our pitch decks with new taglines that felt more polished but less honest. Bless us. When I raised concerns, she brushed them off. "Ilara, this is how we grow. You focus on the code. Let me handle the people." So I did. Because I trusted her. I shouldn't have. One night, I stayed late at the office, trying to fix a glitch in the customer reporting module. Harper had already left for the day. But her door was open. Her laptop was still on, screen glowing. I wasn't snooping, I swear I wasn't. I just saw a folder on her desktop labeled, "Restructure. Final." Curiosity nudged me. And that's when my world cracked open. The documents inside were pristine, legal, binding, and devastating. According to them, PulseNet was founded by Harper Blake. Just Harper. I wasn't listed as a co-founder. I wasn't listed as a partner. I wasn't even acknowledged as a key developer. Just contract support for software services. Footnote. The platform I spent 3 years building was no longer mine. I sat in her chair, staring at the screen, feeling the floor fall out from under me. Everything blurred. My throat closed. I couldn't breathe. Felt sick. When I confronted her the next morning, she didn't even try to lie. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're a genius, Ilara. But you don't get it. Investors want a story. Face. A founder who knows how to sell. You're brilliant. But I'm marketable. I am PulseNet." I don't remember what I said. I don't remember how I left. All I remember is the sound of her voice as I walked out the door. "Don't be dramatic. You wouldn't have made it this far without me." She was right. And that's what made it worse. I didn't sue. I didn't fight. I didn't go public. Could've. But I didn't have the money for a lawyer. And I didn't have the strength to survive another betrayal in court. So I vanished. I rented a room above a laundromat in a neighborhood where no one asked questions. I took freelance coding gigs under fake names. I watched PulseNet grow from a distance. It became a tech darling. Featured in Forbes, Wired, TechCrunch. Harper gave interviews with my code running in the background, calling it her proudest creation. And every time she smiled for the camera, I marked a line on my wall. Not out of obsession, but preparation. Because I wasn't just watching. I was building. I studied everything Harper missed. The security holes in PulseNet's structure. The unpaid intern she stiffed who reached out to me privately. The customer complaints that disappeared from public forums but remained on archived logs. I pieced together a puzzle of corruption, stolen ideas, shady financials, and suppressed whistleblowers. But I didn't want her arrested. Not yet. I wanted the fall to be public, loud, devastating, the kind that echoes. So I created something new. under a new name in a new country. Platform better than PulseNet. Martyr, Fester, Fickle, and Anonymous. I gained users by the thousands. Business owners who'd been burned by Harper's predatory pricing found their way to me. And when they did, I listened. And then, it struck. I timed it perfectly. PulseNet was about to announce its billion-dollar rebrand at a massive tech summit in Los Angeles. Harper was scheduled to be the keynote speaker. She had no idea I was already inside. I'd been working as a contract consultant for their cybersecurity firm for 6 months under the alias Ray Sullivan. And I'd been feeding every last detail to a group of independent journalists, whistleblowers and lawyers, all waiting for one trigger. That trigger was me. The night before the summit, I logged into the PulseNet admin panel. Quietly, calmly, carefully, and I flipped the switch. Customer data, all of it, was sent to an encrypted server, where the security gaps I'd warned them about months ago and been ignored were exposed publicly. The investors found out. The media got copies. Employees walked out. Lawsuits dropped like hammers. Harper walked onto that stage the next morning in a white suit. By the time she walked off, PulseNet stock had crashed by 87%. And I was halfway across the country by then. No statement. No gloating. Just silence. Because I didn't need applause. I needed closure. I needed to remember who I was before she buried me beneath her ambition. And now I'm rebuilding not just my career but my identity. Because I'm not just the girl she erased from the story. I'm the one who rewrote the ending. My name is Ilara Quinn. And this is only the beginning. After the takedown of PulseNet, the world seemed louder, and I felt quieter. In the first 24 hours, everything exploded, not just online but inside me. I expected adrenaline, celebration, some kind of closure. But instead, I sat in a dark room, staring at my laptop screen, with my heart numb and my hands trembling like the crash after a long, sleepless high. I watched headlines flood the news cycle. Tech darling's empire crumbles after anonymous leak. PulseNet breach exposes CEO's dark secrets. Harper Blake under investigation for corporate fraud, harassment. Her name was everywhere. Harper Blake. My mentor, my idol, my best friend once. Now synonymous with scandal, lies, manipulation. I remember the video clip that went viral. She was on stage at a sleek launch event, bathed in blue light, talking about the future of ethical AI, like she believed every syllable. And then it happened. Her assistant rushed on stage mid-speech, whispered something in her ear. The confusion on her face shifted into panic. For a moment she faltered, then tried to regain control. But it was too late. The data dump had already gone live. Internal messages, financial records, contracts, employee complaints, suppressed whistleblower reports. Everything Harper had hidden was now public. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just closed the laptop and sat in the silence of my apartment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional siren outside. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. Because revenge, it turns out, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, the kind that settles in your bones and whispers. Now what? I kept expecting the phone to ring. Kept watching for someone to knock on my door. I wasn't afraid of being caught. I'd covered my tracks too well. Ray Sullivan, the name I used to expose everything, didn't exist anywhere traceable. But fear wasn't what haunted me. It was the emptiness. For years, anger had been the thing that kept me moving. Had been fuel, cold, efficient, necessary. Every line of code, every sleepless night, every step of my plan was powered by the need to make her see what she'd done. What she'd taken from me. But now I was just a girl sitting alone in a city that didn't know her name. The messages started coming in quickly. Emails, forum posts, encrypted DMs. People thanking me, or more accurately, thanking Ray. Some were whistleblowers from other companies, some were coders who said PulseNet had stolen their work, and some were just survivors. Women who recognized the patterns in the emails I leaked. Girls who had felt invisible in the same conference rooms I once sat in. People who had been made to feel small and insane for daring to question power. There was one message that stuck with me most. A girl named Lexi. She said she'd been an intern at PulseNet 2 years ago. Barely 20. Bright, idealistic. She said Harper had pulled her aside one day after a presentation, praised her confidence, then slowly began to isolate her from the rest of the team. A tactic I remembered all too well. Praise. Pendency. Silence. Gaslighting. Lexi had reported it. And she'd been let go 3 weeks later. No one believed her. Till now. Her message was short, but I read it over and over. Thank you, whoever you are. You made me feel sane again. That line broke me. 'Cause I remembered that feeling. I remembered what it was like to stare at the ceiling night after night, wondering if I was imagining the manipulation, the subtle cruelty, the psychological games Harper played. Wondering if I was weak or worse, just dramatic. But no, I wasn't. And neither was Lexi. That night, I opened the window of my tiny apartment. It was cold. The kind of cold that cuts through your sleeves and settles on your skin. But I welcomed it. 'Cause I was alive. And I was free. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way. But in the quiet, terrifying way. Free from the mission. Free from the obsession. Free from Harper's shadow. But also, unmoored. I didn't sleep much after that. Instead, I started writing again, not code but words. Began journaling. Pages and pages of memories, thoughts, the things I never let myself say out loud. I wrote about the first time Harper made me feel like I didn't belong. The first time she used my loyalty against me. The night she pushed me out of the company we built together without blinking. I wrote it all down. And in doing that, I began to feel something return. Not joy, not yet. But a flicker of identity. Valera. The real Ilara Quinn. Not the ghost Harper tried to erase. I started working on small code projects. Anonymous tools. Data encryption programs. Secure whistleblower channels. Nothing flashy. Nothing public. Just work that mattered. Work that helped people who had been silenced like I had. I used new aliases. No face. No credit. Just code. And every time I released something into the world, I whispered to myself, you are not a victim. You are a force. I didn't follow Harper's story closely, but things leaked through. She tried to deny everything at first. Then she blamed her assistant. Then, company culture. When none of that worked, she vanished from the public eye. No more conferences. No more interviews. PulseNet's valuation tanked. The board disbanded. Investors pulled out. Eventually, someone told me she moved to London. Laid low. Rebranded. I don't know if she's still there. I don't care. Because this was never about where she ended up. It was about where I ended up. And for the first time in years, I was in control of that answer. I still don't go by my real name. Not because I'm afraid, but because anonymity gives me power now. Not silence. Power. Every girl Harper tried to erase is out there. Building again, rising again, speaking again. And as for me, I'm still here. Still fighting. Still healing. But now I do it from a place of strength. Not fury. My name is Ilara Quinn. And this is only the beginning of who I'm becoming. You'd think the day the villain falls would feel like triumph. But it didn't. Felt hollow. Like I'd been holding my breath for years, waiting for something explosive. But when it finally happened, when the truth about Harper came crashing down like shattered glass, there was no fanfare. Just silence. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who had just burned down the only home she ever knew, even if that home had always been a cage. The weeks after the exposure were a blur. News outlets picked up fragments of the story, mostly about the fall of PulseNet. They speculated. They got things wrong. They talked about Harper like she was a misunderstood genius who went too far. They didn't talk about the people she stepped on. The ones she gaslight, manipulated, broke. They didn't talk about me. And I didn't correct them. I didn't give interviews. I didn't return calls. I deleted the last post I ever made under my real name and ghosted the digital world I helped build. Because I didn't want to be part of their narrative. I wanted to write my own. I withdrew everything I had left from the PulseNet accounts. Not stolen. Not shady. Just what I had rightfully earned. What Harper couldn't touch because I was smart enough to protect a piece of myself long before I knew I'd need it. I packed my life into one suitcase. And disappeared. I flew to Portugal first. A small city where the sun rises slow and the people don't rush. I found a place above a bookstore tucked in a narrow alleyway. The windows faced the ocean. The floors creaked. There was no air conditioning and the plumbing was finicky. But it was mine. Nobody knew me there. Not as Ilara Quinn. Not as a former tech prodigy. Not as Harper's second shadow. Just Lena. A quiet girl who drank black coffee and always tipped too much at the cafe around the corner. I spent the first few weeks sleeping too much. Or not at all. Some nights I would just sit on the floor in the dark, listening to the sound of the waves crashing beyond the buildings, wondering who I was now. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. And not just because of the haircut or the tan from walking the city on foot. It was something deeper. Like I'd stripped off every layer Harper ever painted onto me. And underneath, I wasn't sure what was left. There's a strange grief that comes after freedom. No one talks about that part. The way you mourn the version of yourself who thought things were going to turn out differently. Who believed in the friendship, the mission, the illusion. You don't just lose people when betrayal happens. You lose your own innocence. And that's the part that cuts the deepest. But slowly I started to build something new. I re-entered the tech world from a distance. Under aliases through encrypted networks. I worked with small non-profit groups helping journalists and dissidents secure their communications. I rewrote the code Harper once twisted and made it safer, cleaner, more human. I didn't want credit. I just wanted to create something that couldn't be corrupted. There was a girl named Neha, based in India, running an underground network helping victims of political abuse. She had no idea who I really was. But she said the code I submitted helped save 3 of her contacts from being arrested. She called me a guardian angel. Cried that night. Not because of guilt, but because, for the first time in years, I felt like I had purpose without pain attached to it. I started journaling. I know, cliché. But there's something about putting thoughts down on paper that feels like bleeding in a controlled way. Here's one thing I wrote. Harper built an empire out of control. And I handed her the bricks. That doesn't mean I can't build something better with what's left. Another entry weeks later. Today I laughed. Really laughed. Not the polite kind. Not the forced kind. Just, boy. I think that means I'm not broken anymore. There's healing in the mundane. In learning how to cook for one. In letting the light in through the windows. In walking to the same bakery every Thursday for that flaky pastry with a cinnamon glaze. In being anonymous. Free. And yet, freedom has a loneliness to it too. Sometimes I wonder what Harper is doing now. She thinks about me. If she ever understood what she destroyed. If she lies awake at night replaying the moment I looked her in the eyes and said, I'm done. Probably not. People like her rarely feel regret. They feel exposed, cornered, inconvenienced. But I do hope she remembers this. She didn't break me. She tried. She used every trick. Gaslighting, sabotage, erasure. She tried to erase me from my own creation. From my own story. But I wrote myself back in. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for every woman who's ever been cast as the sidekick in her own life. For every partner who's been silenced by someone louder, more charismatic, more dangerous. I may never go back to the world I came from. But I'll keep showing up in the places that matter. In safe houses. In whistleblower platforms. In encrypted channels no one else sees. I'm still Ilara Quinn. And I'm still fighting. Not out of rage. But out of something stronger, clarity. Because the worst thing Harper ever did wasn't lying to the world. It was making me lie to myself. But I don't do that anymore. And no one will ever make me small again. Some nights, the silence is the loudest thing in the room. It was one of those nights, the kind where the moon is just a smear behind clouds and even the wind seems to be holding its breath, when I finally let myself feel everything I'd buried for so long. I was curled up in the corner of my apartment, knees drawn to my chest, back against the cold glass of the balcony door. My journal lay open beside me, half-written pages fluttering from the fan. A single line kept circling in my mind. What do you become after someone steals who you were supposed to be? I couldn't answer that yet. But I knew who I used to be. And I was starting to remember who had taken that from me. It wasn't just betrayal. What Harper did wasn't just about sleeping with my fiancé, or stealing PulseNet, or making sure the board voted me out while smiling in my face. No, what Harper did was erase me. Slowly. Intentionally. Like pruning a tree until only one branch, hers, could thrive. She took my name out of the articles. She replaced my contributions with her own in investor meetings. She changed the narrative little by little, until everyone believed she was the genius. I was just the support. And for a while, let her. 'Cause I loved her. Because I believed in her. Because I didn't want to be difficult. There's a particular kind of damage that comes from being manipulated by someone you trust. Doesn't show up all at once. It's not a stab wound. It's a paper cut every day. A glance that makes you doubt yourself. A comment that makes you shrink a little smaller. An apology that sounds sincere enough to forgive. until you realize it's the 50th one that week. I started replaying our conversations, remembering the microaggressions, the ways she'd laugh at my ideas and later pitch them as her own. I remembered a night, maybe 2 years into PulseNet, when I'd stayed up for 38 hours straight debugging a critical patch before a product launch. I barely made it to the presentation, trembling from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Harper. She showed up 20 minutes late, with perfect hair, perfect lipstick, perfect applause waiting for her. She said, "We built this together." But I had done the building. And she was already chiseling my name off the cornerstone. I didn't want to be bitter. I refused to be another woman whose identity was shaped by pain. But the more I sat in silence, the more I realized how much of myself I'd already given away. That night, after sitting on the floor for hours, I stood up, poured myself a glass of wine, and opened a hidden drive on my old laptop. A collection of files I hadn't touched in almost a year. Screenshots, audio clips, source code timestamps, board meeting recordings. I hadn't gathered them out of spite. I'd gathered them to remind myself that I wasn't crazy. That the things she'd denied, the things that happened in shadows, had happened. I wasn't imagining them. And now, it was time to use them. Not to destroy her. That would be too easy. Well, I wanted to dismantle the myth. Piece by piece. Not just for me. For every woman who'd been pushed out of her own legacy. For every co-founder who disappeared when the spotlight came. For every genius who stayed up all night coding, designing, writing, only to watch someone else take the credit. I reached out to an old contact in the tech press, someone who had once offered to tell my side of the PulseNet story, before everything fell apart. I ignored them then. I wasn't ready. I was still protecting her. Still protecting a version of our story I wanted to believe was true. But now, I sent one message. I'm ready to talk. No aliases. No filters. Just the truth. The response came in under 5 minutes. Say when and where. We met at a quiet rooftop bar downtown, private enough to talk freely, loud enough that no one would eavesdrop. I wore a plain black coat, no makeup, hair tied back. Not because I was hiding. 'Cause I wanted to feel like me again. The journalist, Mira, greeted me like an old friend. But she didn't smile the way Harper used to. There was no agenda in her eyes. Just curiosity. And maybe, under that, a little awe. She listened for 4 hours straight. I told her everything. Not just the betrayal but the rot beneath the success. The culture of silencing. The way Harper manipulated data to keep investors happy. The stolen designs. The partners paid to look the other way. The ethics we sacrificed to grow too fast, too big. Mira didn't flinch. She just kept writing. When we were done, she asked me one question. Why now? I looked her dead in the eye and said, because I finally believe my story matters. And because silence has protected the wrong people for too long. The article was scheduled to run in 3 weeks. But by then, the story had already begun to ripple behind the scenes. The boardroom buzz was shifting. The whispers were getting louder. The truth was on its way. And for the first time since losing everything, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I didn't sleep the night before the article went live. Not because I was afraid of what it would do to Harper, but because I had no idea what it would do to me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the silence in my apartment felt like it was pressing against my chest. The windows were open, the city outside was moving. Cars, laughter, late-night walkers, but inside it felt like I was holding my breath in a locked room. The truth was about to be free, and I didn't know if it would set me free or destroy me all over again. At 6:01 a.m., Mira texted me. It's live. 2 words. That's all. I didn't open the link immediately. Couldn't. Instead, I stood by the window and watched the sun crawl over the skyline. It looked exactly the same as every other morning. But I wasn't the same. I wasn't the scared girl quietly choking on betrayal, walking on eggshells while Harper smiled for investors and took credit for code she hadn't touched. I wasn't hiding anymore. By 7:15 a.m., my inbox started pinging. By 8:04, the article had been picked up by 3 major outlets. By 10:30, PulseNet was trending, but not for the reasons Harper had built it. I finally read it around noon, sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, holding my laptop like it might bite me. Every paragraph cut open old wounds. But it also stitched something new, truth. Mira had been ruthless. She backed up every word with evidence. Timestamps, emails, internal logs. Even quotes from old employees who agreed to speak anonymously. She'd called it the ghost in the code, the forgotten founder of PulseNet. And for the first time in years I was that founder. Not the girl Harper forced out. Not the silent partner. Not the emotional liability, or the distraction. I was the woman who had built the framework, the logic, the DNA of the platform that changed everything. And I was done being silent. The comments section exploded. Not with pity, with rage, with support, with shock. People couldn't believe it. Or maybe they could. Maybe they were just finally ready to admit that the tech world had a habit of doing this, erasing, silencing, rewriting history in favor of who looked better on a TED stage. And Harper. She didn't respond. Not at first. She went quiet for 48 hours, which in her world was practically a lifetime. I imagine she was sitting in her glass office, fingers trembling, watching her legacy splinter like ice under pressure. Then finally she cracked. Tweet. Simple. If. Corporate. There are two sides to every story. I respect Ilara's and will be issuing a statement soon. No apology. No accountability. Just deflection. But the world didn't want a statement anymore. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. Within days, old employees came forward. A former intern who said Harper made her cry during a pitch meeting. A lead designer who said Harper fired him for speaking out about gender disparities in bonuses. Even Ruben, the engineer who once looked at me like I was invisible, posted a thread acknowledging the article and confirming everything Mira had written. We failed Ilara. And I failed her worst of all because I knew. Every hour, another piece of Harper's carefully curated image unraveled. PR firms scrambled. Her board demanded internal reviews. Shareholders started asking if PulseNet's origin story was built on fiction. And through it all, I didn't gloat. I didn't scream. I told you so. I just watched. Quiet. Measured. Present. Because revenge wasn't what I was after. Truth was. It was never about taking Harper down. It was about standing in the world as my full self again. Not edited, not minimized, not buried beneath someone else's success. There was one moment, 3 days after the article dropped, that stayed with me. A letter arrived. Not an email. Physical letter. Handwritten. Shaky penmanship. From a woman in her 60s. She said she'd spent 30 years in tech. She had built incredible things. And she had been erased every single time. When I read your story, she wrote, I cried for the girl I used to be. But I also stood a little taller today. Because you gave us a voice. I held that letter in my hands for a long time. It was soft. Faded in places. Smelled faintly of lavender. I never replied. But I placed it in a small wooden box under my bed. With a photo of my grandmother, my first notebook filled with messy JavaScript scribbles, and the flash drive containing the original PulseNet prototype. The one Harper never knew I kept. Those 3 things. They were my truth. Not for the world. For me. The days that followed blurred together. Interviews, panels, podcasts. I was nervous at first. My voice shook. My hands sweat. But with each telling I grew steadier. Louder. Stronger. And people listened. Not because I had a perfect story. But because I told the truth. Because I didn't dress it up in PR. Because I didn't hide behind legal jargon or buzzwords. I stood in front of rooms filled with strangers and said, they erased me. But I'm writing myself back in. And the world finally listened. Then came the email from Stanford. They invited me to speak at a tech ethics panel. Me. The girl who once dropped out because she couldn't afford tuition. The girl Harper called too soft for scale. I went. And I stood at that podium, looked at a room full of bright-eyed students, and told them what no one had told me at their age. Don't confuse silence with professionalism. Don't let anyone make you feel disposable. And never ever forget that your voice is your proof of life. Use it. Afterward, a girl with curly hair and trembling hands approached me. She said, I almost dropped out of engineering this semester. But not anymore. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about Harper anymore. This was bigger. This was about us. A week after the article dropped, I received a message I never thought I'd see. From Harper. Not an email. Not a voicemail. But a direct message. Like we were still in college. Still building PulseNet on borrowed laptops and stale coffee. Still believing in something that hadn't yet betrayed us. The message was only 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at it for nearly 5 full minutes. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was surprised she used a question mark. Harper never asked for anything. She took. And now she wanted a conversation. I didn't reply right away. In fact, I almost deleted the message altogether. But something inside me, a strange, unsettled curiosity, needed to see her. Not to forgive. Not to listen. But to witness. To look her in the eyes and see if there was anything left behind them. So I said yes. We agreed to meet at a neutral cafe downtown. A quiet place tucked between a bookstore and a florist. One Harper would never choose on her own. Too plain. Too human. She arrived early. Course she did. She was wearing a cream blazer, designer sunglasses, and a carefully composed expression. But it was all camouflage. The moment I sat across from her, I saw it. Her eyes. They were tired. Not in the way that comes from lack of sleep, no. This was a deeper kind of exhaustion. The kind that happens when your world starts cracking, and you have no idea which way to run because you built that world yourself. "Ilara," she said, almost too quietly. "You look good." I didn't respond. I let the silence stretch. Let her feel it. She took off her sunglasses and placed them on the table like that would somehow soften the space between us. I didn't know where else to say this, she started. "Everything's spiraling. The board is threatening to remove me. Investors are pulling out. People are turning on me like I'm poison." I watched her carefully. No interruptions. No nods of sympathy. Just listening. Because for the first time in our shared history, she wasn't the one holding the power. "I know I hurt you," she said, looking down at her coffee. "I know I took things I shouldn't have. But I didn't know it would end like this." That made me laugh. A short, sharp sound. More exhale than joy. "End," said. "You think this is the end?" She blinked. "Isn't it?" I leaned forward. My voice stayed calm. Level. "This isn't the end, Harper. It's the beginning. The beginning of me taking back every piece of myself you tried to bury. The beginning of building something that's mine. Without you. Without your shadow." She looked like she wanted to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. For years I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I had misunderstood you. Maybe I'd made it bigger in my head than it was. But I didn't. You made me question my own mind. My own memory. You took my name off my own work. You smiled through it like it was just strategy. Pause. "I wasn't asking for revenge, Harper. I was asking for acknowledgement. You couldn't even give me that." A flicker of emotion crossed her face. Maybe guilt, maybe regret. But it was too late for either to matter. "I didn't expect you to blow it all up," she said finally. "I didn't blow it up," I said. "You did. I just stopped holding the pieces together." She didn't cry. Harper never cried. At least not in front of anyone. But she did whisper, barely audible. "I didn't think you'd ever come back." I stood. I didn't either. And then I left. I didn't look back. Not because I was being dramatic. But because I didn't need to see the moment her expression fell. That wasn't my burden to carry anymore. That evening, I returned home to a flood of messages. Former employees asking to collaborate. Activists reaching out. Women in tech thanking me for breaking the silence. But there was one message that hit different. It was from a girl named Ava. A 17-year-old high school senior in Ohio. She'd read the article. She said it made her rethink quitting her AP computer science class, even though she was the only girl in the room. She ended with, "Thank you for not staying quiet. Now I won't either." I stared at that message longer than I'd stared at Harper's. Because that was the legacy I wanted. Not revenge. Not Harper's downfall. But a girl choosing to stay, because she saw someone like her fight back and win. That night, I sat down with a blank journal. I hadn't written in years. Not by hand. But I picked up a pen, and at the top of the page I wrote, "Day 1, the life I'm building, no longer the one I'm escaping." And that's what this part of the story became. Not escape. Not survival. But creation. A new company maybe. Foundation. Book. Whatever it becomes, it'll have my name on it. No edits. No erasure. Just Ilara Quinn. Unfiltered, unshaken, and finally free. After the meeting with Harper, the world didn't change immediately. There was no lightning bolt, no applause. I didn't walk out of that cafe feeling triumphant. I just felt hollow. Like I'd finally burned the last bridge that ever connected me to the girl I used to be. I took the long way home that day. through back streets, side alleys, the parts of the city most people ignored. I needed the silence. I needed the space to breathe. My hands were trembling the entire time, not from fear, but from the weight of finality. Harper's face haunted me in a different way now. Not as the villain of my story, but as a mirror. She was everything I could have become if I'd let ambition swallow my soul. She didn't cry when I told her I knew the truth. She didn't scream or deny it. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, she stared at me with a look that wasn't quite guilt. More like regret that I'd found out. That hurt more. By the time I got back to my apartment, the internet had already exploded. The article I'd published anonymously, the story of how a girl was erased by the very machine she helped build, had gone viral. I didn't attach my name to it at first. I wanted the truth to speak louder than my identity. But by the next morning, people figured it out. The clues were there, buried in code snippets, in timelines, in subtle references only people in the industry would catch. Suddenly, everyone knew my name again. Alara Quinn. The girl genius who vanished. The co-founder who was erased. The face behind the success Harper Quinn had stolen. My inbox overflowed. Dozens of reporters, legal advisors, investors claiming they always believed in me. People who had turned their backs were suddenly applauding. It was nauseating, and I didn't trust any of it. But beneath the noise, something else emerged. Something quieter, more honest. Messages from girls. From women. From people who had experienced betrayal in classrooms, in labs, in boardrooms. Stories that mirrored mine in different flavors. Some had been pushed aside for speaking up. Others had been silenced entirely. And they were all saying the same thing. Your story made me feel seen. That meant something. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to chase media. I wasn't going to fight Harper in court, or feed the PR machine trying to eat me alive. I was going to build again. But this time not for investors. Not for scale. Not for a spotlight I never asked for. This time I would build something for the ones like me. The girls who had been stepped on, shut out, overwritten. I cashed out what was left of my shares. Quietly. Legally. No lawsuits. No threats. Just enough to fund what I needed. And then I disappeared. Not in fear, in power. I moved into a different part of the city. Not far, but far enough to feel like a new beginning. I found a loft space with cracked windows, paint that peeled in the corners, and a rooftop covered in rusted beams. It was perfect. There I started Second Spark. At first it was just a whiteboard, a laptop, and a notebook filled with crossed-out ideas. I worked through the nights, fueled by coffee and the kind of stubbornness only a woman who's been betrayed can summon. I didn't want to create another startup. I wanted to build a sanctuary. A place where young women could learn tech, yes, but more than that, where they could learn how to protect themselves. How to own their ideas. How to survive in an industry that still, to this day, chews them up and spits them out. I reached out to 3 women I trusted. Brilliant minds, all of them with stories like mine. Together we designed the program. Not flashy. Not corporate. Real. Focused. Our first group had 12 girls. Some came from community colleges. Others from foster care. A few had been accepted into top universities but dropped out after harassment or isolation drove them to the edge. They came to us timid. But they didn't stay that way. They learned to code, yes. But also how to negotiate. How to say no. How to speak in a room full of men who doubted them. We tore down the lies they'd been fed and helped them build something stronger in their place. There was one moment I'll never forget. Her name was Lila. She was 17. Brilliant, but terrified of speaking up. One afternoon she pulled me aside. I read your article, she said. I know it was you. I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know how to respond. I'd spent so long hiding in shame. I forgot what it felt like to be someone's reason to keep going. Later she presented a project. A small security tool she'd built from scratch. Not flashy. Not perfect. But it worked. And more importantly, she explained it with confidence. Hit me like a wave. That was the victory. Not Harper's downfall. Not revenge. These girls. Their fire. Their future. Outside of Second Spark, life softened. I adopted a stray cat I found under a vending machine. Named her Comet. She curled up next to me every night like she knew I was still learning how to sleep again. I started running in the mornings. No music. Just the sound of my breath, my feet on pavement, my body waking up again. I let myself smile. even laugh. Sometimes, when the city lights flickered through my window, I'd look out and whisper to the girl I used to be, "You made it." And slowly that stopped feeling like a lie. A month after the article, Harper sent me one last message. "Whatever happens next, I hope you find peace." I didn't answer. Not out of anger, but because I already had. Because peace, I realized, wasn't silence. It was freedom. The freedom to rebuild. To walk away. To choose joy without apology. I wasn't the ghost of a startup anymore. I was a spark again. Not because someone lit me, but because I remembered I was fire all along. It was early, maybe 7:30 a.m., when I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against my window like a memory. It wasn't a storm, not like the ones I used to brace myself against, but a soft, rhythmic drizzle, the kind that makes you think, reflect, regret, or in my case, unravel. I had been feeling it for weeks, that subtle unraveling, like a thread being pulled from the hem of a dress you didn't notice was fraying. The truth was, Second Spark was thriving. 3 cohorts of graduates, dozens of partnerships, new tech sponsors rolling in with promises of funding and support. Girls from across the country applying, hoping to be seen, to be chosen, to be saved. And still I didn't feel peace. Some nights I still woke up sweating. I'd dream I was back in that lab again. Harper standing above me, eyes cold, hands shaking with adrenaline. Or sometimes it was Jonah, whispering the lie I once believed. "We're building something the world needs, Ilara." But it wasn't the dreams that haunted me most. It was the silence. That strange, hollow feeling of having no one to tell things to. No one who really knew me before the destruction. Before the fire. Before I became the version of myself who no longer flinched at betrayal, because I expected it. I got dressed slowly that morning. Threw on a dark green sweater, pulled my hair into a braid, and decided to walk to the cafe instead of ordering in. Comet followed me to the door, his tail wagging lazily like he approved of my choice. The streets were still quiet. New York in the rain is a different kind of magic. Smells like iron and wet asphalt. It hushes the city, tames its pulse for a little while. Umbrellas moved like petals blooming in the distance. Taxis honked more gently. I crossed 3rd Avenue and slipped into the corner cafe, the same one I used to visit before the scandal, before the firestorm. Somehow they never recognized me there. Or if they did, they never said. Maybe anonymity had finally become my armor. I ordered a cinnamon roll and a black coffee, sat by the window, and pulled out a novel I'd been trying to finish for weeks. I didn't get past the first sentence. Because that's when I saw him. Cross the street. Melo. My first real heartbreak. My first best friend. The boy who once asked if we could build a world where people didn't have to be afraid to be brilliant. He was taller than I remembered, though still lean. His curls had grown out, just enough to look unkempt, and he wore a brown leather jacket that looked a little too worn for someone working in finance, or whatever he ended up doing after school. Froze. Not because I was afraid of him, but because he was the last person who knew me before I became the woman the media called Silicon Valley's scorched angel. He glanced up. Saw me. And just like that, he started walking toward the cafe. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I considered ducking, running, fleeing out the back door like I had so many times before. But I didn't. Because some part of me, the part that still remembered what it felt like to be loved without an agenda, wanted to know why he was here. The bell over the cafe door jingled as he stepped in. "Ilara!" His voice cracked, low and unsure. I looked up, met his eyes, nodded. "Hey," I said. He sat across from me like no time had passed, like we were still 19 and dreaming. Only now, there were fine lines at the corners of his eyes, and a heaviness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "I thought I'd never see you again," he said. "I didn't think anyone would," I replied. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. That article, the exposé, the trial, the fallout, I read every word. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. "I didn't know how bad it got," he said quietly. "I didn't know what they did to you." "They counted on that," I said, sipping my coffee. "On everyone not knowing." He looked down at his hands, rubbed them together. Then he said the last thing I expected. "I didn't just come to say hi. I came to ask for help." Blinked. "Help." He pulled out his phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward me. Photo of a girl. 16, maybe 17. Thick glasses, fierce eyes, nervous smile. "Ava," he said. "My little sister." He paused, watching my face. She got into this tech prep academy. Private, ultra-competitive. Said it was her dream school. But now she's calling me in tears. Says there's something going on. Harassment. Abuse of power. Girls being pushed out quietly when they speak up. And now they're turning on her. She spoke up. And they're trying to bury her. I stared at the photo. At Ava's eyes. They reminded me of myself. Of every girl who ever stood on the edge of something powerful, only to be shoved back down. She needs help, Milo said. She needs you. I leaned back, heart pounding. My hands were already curling into fists. It was happening again. Not to me, but to someone else. And I couldn't walk away. I took a long breath, then nodded. All right, I said. We help her. But we do it my way. He looked relieved, grateful. Thank you, Elara. But I was already thinking ahead. I wasn't just going to protect Ava. I was going to take down anyone who thought they could crush another girl for daring to speak. Because I'd already burned down one empire. And I had matches left. I didn't waste time. Within 72 hours, I had a new name, a falsified resume, and a meeting set up with the head of admissions at Langston Tech Academy. The elite private school Ava had been accepted into. The same school now trying to erase her voice. My new identity. Dr. Rowan Blake, a former MIT researcher turned STEM ethics consultant, applying for a short-term position teaching a course on responsible innovation. Perfect front. The kind of hire a place like Langston would see as a publicity win. Money made things move fast. Influence made them move faster. And when you have both, plus a score to settle, the doors swing open almost too easily. The academy campus was all glass walls and polished concrete, cold minimalism wrapped in wealth. It sat on the edge of a hill in upstate New York, tucked behind a forest like it had something to hide. The kind of place that looked safe on the outside because danger wore expensive suits on the inside. Ava met me on my first day. She was smaller in person than I expected, but her presence was sharp. Like she'd grown armor fast and was still adjusting to the weight of it. Her hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and she held her books close like a shield. I introduced myself as Dr. Blake. She didn't flinch. But when I looked her in the eyes and said quietly, "Your brother says hi," her mouth parted just slightly. Then she nodded once and walked away. Smart girl. They were watching her. And now they'd be watching me too. My office was tucked near the robotics lab. Clean, sparse, and already bugged. I spotted the camera hidden in the corner vent within minutes. I left it there. Let them think I had nothing to hide. Let them think I was just another academic chasing prestige. Meanwhile, I started digging. Not in the systems, not yet. First, I listened. The students were brilliant, inventive, unfiltered when they thought no one important was listening. I heard whispers about quiet expulsions, code swaps, and projects that vanished. I saw files disappear from public logs, girls' names removed from team credits overnight. And then there was the foundation. No one mentioned it openly, but I kept hearing it in fragments. She got invited to the foundation dinner. They said the foundation's tracking our work now. Just smile, okay? You don't want the foundation noticing you for the wrong reasons. So I asked Ava. We met on a bench behind the chemistry wing at twilight, where the cameras thinned out. She looked around carefully, then whispered, "The foundation runs a separate stream here. It's not on any brochure. They only invite top students, usually girls, mostly marginalized ones. They call it mentorship." I frowned. And what is it really? Ava bit her lip. Her voice dropped lower. They take your work, everything you build in your personal time. They say it's for real-world testing. But you never hear about it again. Some of us think they're selling the designs. Others think they're feeding it to defense contractors. And what happened when you asked? They pulled my project. Accused me of falsifying data. They gave me one warning. Said if I keep causing disruption, I'd be labeled a breach risk. Clenched my jaw. It was Harper and Jonah's game all over again, rewritten in a different institution under a shinier name. Another factory built to mine brilliance from girls too isolated to protect themselves. And the worst part, some of the staff knew. I met with the head of operations, a slick man named Dean Harlan, who smiled like a crocodile and called the students our finest investment. He talked about talent pipelines and maximizing return on innovation. He never once used the word student without following it with asset. I left the meeting nauseous. That night, I broke into the restricted server room using a cloned admin key I lifted from the janitor's badge ring. Took 30 seconds. The files I found were encrypted, but not beyond me. Inside, schematics, source code, prototypes, dozens of them. And every one of them was traced back to a female student, including Ava. Each file had 2 folders. Original, the version the girl submitted. Repackaged, the version scrubbed of all identifying markers, stamped with a Langston Foundation logo, and forwarded to private companies. I traced one of Ava's designs, a real-time language processing tool for neurodivergent students, to a patent filed by a defense firm 3 months ago. They'd renamed it, redesigned the interface, but the backbone was hers. She'd created it to help people. They were using it to build surveillance drones. I stared at the screen for a long time, sick to my stomach. Then I copied everything. Emails, files, time logs, even the internal memos bragging about low-risk asset acquisition, and 0 whistleblowers in 4 fiscal years. I didn't know if I wanted to cry or scream. Instead, I walked back to my temporary apartment, fed Comet, and sat down at my desk. Because it wasn't enough to expose this. I had to make sure it couldn't happen again. I was going to build a weapon, not of code, not of violence, but of truth, sharpened into something no one could ignore. I was going to take down the Langston Foundation from the inside, piece by piece, one stolen idea at a time. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Not because of nightmares. I'd already made peace with those. It was the silence I couldn't bear. The kind that comes when you're standing at the edge of a decision so massive. You know you'll never be the same once it's done. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was aware. Every detail had to be perfect. Langston Global thought they were untouchable. Their boardrooms were layered with lawyers. Their systems encrypted like a fortress. But they didn't realize someone who'd been inside, someone who knew the smell of their polished lies, could also smell the cracks. And I knew every single one. Over the last few months, I had quietly gathered every document, every NDA silenced complaint, every blueprint and grant proposal they'd stolen from young minds who trusted them. I had enough evidence to bury half their executive board. But this was never just about exposing corruption. It was about reclaiming stories. They took Ava's story and repackaged it as a Langston miracle. They took the dreams of children, poor, hungry, desperate for a future, and sold them to investors as innovation. And now I had the proof. The first move was surgical. I leaked one internal memo to a tiny ethics newsletter, the kind of place where industry whistleblowers whispered in footnotes. The memo was just a scrap, a line item about IP acquisition through academic mentorship, cold and sterile. But it was enough to make ripples. Langston responded with a sweeping internal policy change and a quiet audit of digital vulnerabilities. They didn't know who was poking them. That made them nervous. And nervous men make mistakes. The next step was getting back inside. I volunteered for Langston's next mentorship cohort under a false name, using credentials I knew they wouldn't question because I had built most of their vetting system myself years ago. Walking through those glass doors again felt like stepping into a preserved crime scene. The walls were the same. The smiling interns were the same. The fake motivational posters. The curated diversity for photoshoots. But I wasn't the same. And the most surreal part. Neither was Harper. I saw her at a board luncheon during my second week. Her hair was shorter, sharper. Her heels higher. Her voice perfectly trained to hit just the right notes of warm authority. But her eyes were flat. The grief she'd paraded after Ava's death had calcified into brand strategy. She didn't even flinch when a student, a 16-year-old coding prodigy, nervously pitched her idea for an AI mental health companion. Harper smiled and said, "We'll take care of it. You just focus on school." I knew what that meant. The next day, the girl's access to her own project was revoked. I found her crying in the hallway near the stairwell where I used to sit with Ava. She looked up at me with wet eyes and whispered, "It was mine. I just wanted to help people like me." And something inside me burned all over again. I told her the truth. About Langston. About the pipeline. About what they'd done to others before her. She didn't even cry harder. She just nodded like she already knew and whispered, "What do we do now?" Not me. Not alone. It reminded me why I started this. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was rescue. Over the next month, I built the framework. A secure digital platform where victims of intellectual theft could anonymously submit what they'd lost. Each submission was time-stamped, tracked, matched to Langston patents and press releases. I called it Their Voices First. The website had no logos, no links, just a blank page and one sentence. You deserve to be seen. And a button that said, Show the Truth. I synced the website launch to Langston's biggest annual event, the Tech for Tomorrow Global Summit. Thousands of attendees. Millions of live stream viewers. Harper would be on the stage, delivering a keynote about empowering the next generation. I had her script, I had the live feed, and I had admin access to the presentation software, thanks to a mistake made by a former assistant who never changed their password. Everything was ready, but I wasn't done yet. There was one more thing I had to do. I had to look Harper in the eye. Not to ask for anything, not even to gloat, but to let her know she hadn't won. I sent her a private message the morning of the summit. Just 10 words. You built this empire on borrowed brilliance. Time to return it. No name, no signature, just the truth. Then I stood by. Waited for her to take the stage. Waited for the moment where her smile would freeze on camera as the live stream glitched, and thousands of files, images, names, and dates flooded the screen behind her. I could already hear the gasps, the headlines, justice. But I didn't care about the noise. I only cared about the silence that would follow. The silence that belongs to the truth, when it finally gets to speak. I didn't plan what I'd say when I stood in front of her again. But when the door opened and she saw me, something in both of us broke. My mother's eyes, the same ones that watched them drag me away as a child, widened. Not in joy, not in regret, in fear. She stepped back instinctively, clutching the edge of the door like it might protect her, like I might be the one coming to take something now. Ilara, she whispered, like maybe if she said it softly, it wouldn't be real. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her. Gray hair, wrinkled skin, a body smaller than I remembered. Time had taken from her too. But I wasn't here to compare wounds. I was here to finish something. I thought you were dead, she said, voice trembling. I was, I told her. You made sure of that. Her lips parted, maybe to deny it, maybe to lie the way she always had, but then she didn't. Her face fell. And she looked away. Why are you here? She asked. I wanted to see if it still hurt, I said. To stand in front of you and not feel like a ghost. She swallowed hard. I don't know what you want me to say. I'm not here for an apology, I replied. I came to say goodbye. But I wanted you to see who I became. Without you. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a split second, I saw the woman she might have been if her choices had been different. But it was too late for that version of her. You were just a child, she whispered. I was your child, I snapped. And you chose him. Over me. Over the truth. She sank down onto the edge of the couch, almost like her body couldn't carry the weight anymore. Do you know what it's like, I continued, to scream into the dark and know no one's coming? To grow up thinking you were born to be used, to be disposable. I built my whole life from that silence. Ilara, please. No. You don't get to beg now. She started crying. Not the kind that comes from shock or regret, but the kind that comes from finally being seen in all the ugliness. And I let her sit in it. Then I turned toward the door. Ilara, she called after me. Can I ever be forgiven? Stop. My hand on the knob. My heart heavier than I expected. I don't know, I said. But it's not my burden anymore. I walked away. Outside the air felt different. Lighter but not easy. Not clean. Just real. It wasn't closure in the way movies pretend it is. It was something messier. Something truer. I spent the next weeks wrapping up the last of my plans. The fund I'd set up for survivors was growing fast. Anonymous donors. Quiet supporters. People who'd heard my story and wanted to help, even if they didn't know my name. One day, I was sitting by the water, watching the waves crawl in and out like they had secrets of their own, when someone sat beside me. Mura. She didn't say anything at first. Just handed me a small journal. I found this in your box, she said. You left it behind. I flipped through the pages. Letters. Age. Dreams. Scraps of the girl I used to be. You've come so far, she whispered. Too far to go back, I replied. She nodded. But not too far to start again. I looked at her. This quiet ally who never tried to save me, just stood by me when I saved myself. And I smiled. I'm tired, I admitted. You've earned rest, she said. Maybe that was the real ending. Not revenge. Not redemption. But rest. Not forgetting the pain, just no longer letting it be the only thing I carry. I still get nightmares sometimes. But I also get letters. From girls who say, "I saw your story. It made me believe I could live." And every time I read those words, I know it was worth it. Not for justice. Not even for peace. But for power. The kind that says, "You didn't break me. You just sharpened me. My name is Ilara Quinn. They tried to silence me. But now the whole world listens. And if you're hearing this, you're part of that world now. So if this story meant something to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another voice rising from the ashes. Because this isn't just my story anymore. It's ours.